Paul Metsa's Wall of Power TV is brought to you in part by Iron Range Resources and Rehabilitation, Two Gingers Irish Whiskey, Grey Wolf Lodge, your home away from home in the North Woods, and the Solar Arts Building in Northeast Minneapolis. This program was produced and originally broadcast in 2017.
You're back with the Wall of Power. This is your host, Paul Metsa. My guest in the studio for the whole show tonight, my new friend, Mr. Barry ZeVan. There's dozens of fascinating stories in your book, but the one that, maybe it's because I was just paging through when I had time, but one of the first stories I read was Bob Newhart.
Yep.
Was a huge supporter of yours.
Okay, I had a talk show in Las Vegas on television.
And what year was this?
This is 60, well, from 68 to 70. And in 70, Bob was on my show frequently. He was at the Desert Inn. It's a TV talk show in the mornings, in addition to doing the weather. And so one day, I was driving him back to the Desert Inn. He used to refer to my weather shows in his comedy act at the Desert Inn. He said, "Watch Barry ZeVan." He said, "This guy's fantastic, blah, blah, blah." And what an honor that was. So anyway, driving him back one morning, he said, "You know, you belong in a much bigger market." He said, "Why don't you get Broadcasting Magazine and see if there are some ads for Weather Guy out there in a bigger city?" And I said, "Okay." Well, ironically, the next week in Broadcasting, there was an ad. It said, "Upper Midwest television station wants personality weatherman. Apply to box such and such." As you know, they don't list the city.
Right.
And so I thought.
But what was your shtick as the weatherman?
Well, it was the same. It was the same thing.
Right.
I mean, I had every star on the strip was on my show, my weather show every night. Robert Goulet started that parade, and Juliette Prowse and Red Fox and just a whole bunch
Woody
of others.
Allen.
Well, no, Woody was never on my show.
Okay.
No. I directed.
But he did a promo for you at one point.
Oh, he did a promo
Yeah.
for me. I directed him in 3 local television shows there, though.
Right.
Before I went to Channel 13. This was at Channel 8 when I worked for Howard Hughes. And that's another story in the book, too. Several stories about Hughes. But anyhow, so ironically, there was a Broadcasting Magazine in the studio laying around, and it said that ad, Upper Midwest TV station wants personality weatherman. So I decided to send the wackiest tape that I could find. And my logic was that if they want me and see this, and if they see this tape and they still want me, then that means they really want me.
Right. And
I was scared to death, too. I've always really kind of lived on the edge, very insecure in many, many times of my life.
As are a lot of entertainers.
Yeah, that's what well, Red Skelton was notorious for it. He thought he was going to lose everything every time he went on stage. So anyhow, I got a call from KSTP a week later. It said, "We want to talk to you. You have blown away everybody in a focus group." It was Frank Maggin, Maggin and Associates.
Okay, and what year was that?
1970.
Okay.
Yeah. So they flew me back here to the Twin Cities, and I'll try to make this as succinct as I can. They said, "We'll start you out at $17,000 a year." And I'm looking at KSTP and thinking, this magnificent station, I'm making $12,000 in Las Vegas and still surviving on it pretty well. And they said, "But don't worry about that, because we want you here for a long time.
Right.
And we will make sure your pay is sufficiently increased."
And good exposure, as they
Yeah,
say.
well, I didn't even think about that.
Right.
So anyway, I looked at the station, and it was so magnificent. I later found out that NBC used to use it for their executives to come out from New York to watch how a real television station was. And Mr. Hubbard, of course, was phenomenal. Mr. Hubbard Sr. He and all the stars were friends. Some stories about him in there, too. And God bless.
They were still on University Avenue?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
They've been on University Avenue from the very beginning.
Wow.
So, and he got the money to start KSTP-TV from my hometown bank, the Mellon National Bank in Pittsburgh.
Really?
Yeah. he borrowed the money in 1947 to get on the air in 48. So anyway, they said, we don't sign contracts, but we want you, blah, blah. So when can you start? And I said, well, I have to give proper notice and so forth. So they said, well, why don't we start you out in November? This was in August. Well, I got back, and I got a call from an agent in Beverly Hills. His name was Steve Silverberg. And he said, Nancy Sinatra and Dionne Warwick's husband said you belong in the LA market.
Wow.
To do the weather. And I said, well, I've just come back from the Twin Cities, and I told him a story. He said, well, they don't sign contracts there. And I said, you're right. He said, why don't you give me some tapes anyway and see what can work out? And I thought, oh, what the heck. So he drove up from LA. I met him at Caesar's Palace with a shopping bag full of these great big tapes that we had in those days.
Right.
That was the last I heard from him until the moving van was in our driveway in November. This one morning, I also did the morning news in addition to the weather at night, so they were
long day.
They were using me. I get this call in the control room. I mean, in the newsroom, not the control room. The exact words, "You're hired," just like that. The voice was, you're very affected.
Right.
And I said, who are you and what am I hired for? He said, my name is Bill Fife, and I'm news director at KTLA Channel 5 in Los Angeles. And we want you to be our weatherman, and you'll be working with a brand new up-and-coming newsman named Tom Snyder.
Wow.
I would have been Tom Snyder's weather guy. So anyway, I said, Mr. Fife, I said, oh, and we'll start you out at $40,000 a year. KS was going to give me 17. So I said, Mr. Fife, and I told him the story, and he said, well, if you feel you have a moral obligation. I said, I couldn't look at myself in the mirror and tell them I'm not coming back because they believe in me. He said, well, we believe in you too. He said, but if you feel you have a moral obligation, we'll catch up sometime. So I turned down Los Angeles to come here, but by the same token, I'm happy I did. The Hubbards were wonderful to me. I stupidly quit that station for more money in Washington, D.C. after Mr. Hubbard offered me a lifetime job. And how stupid can you be? But anyway, with Bill Fife, in February, KSTP had me do booth announcing from November, and we still hadn't found the rest of the team. So they had me in booth announcing till the team was found. Well, in February that year, I got very discouraged, and I thought, I'm going to call Bill Fife. We don't have a contract. Maybe I can still go to L.A. So
you know what? Let's hold on that story right there, because we're hanging on a cliff now. We're with Barry ZeVan on the Wall of Power Radio Hour. More with Barry and your host, Paul Metsa, after these messages.
Majors, Ryther, ZeVan. We got who you wanted, starting February 11th on KSTP5's Eyewitness News.
What time did you say you have to be at KSTP?
Monday, February 11th.
Funny. Oh, that's the day that new news guy starts there. Ron Majors. Between Ryther and that goofball ZeVan. They ought to be something to see. Here we are.
Keep the change, thank you.
Hey, Ron, how you doing?
Major,
Yeah,
welcome.
How are you?
Great. Welcome to Viking country. Thank you very much.
And warm, too, you know.
To your new home.
Hey, you are Ron Majors. Boy, I'm going to watch that show.
Welcome back to the Wall of Power Radio Hour. This is your host, Paul Metsa. My guest in the studio for the whole show tonight, Mr. Barry ZeVan. We're talking about his life, which he has chronicled in this great autobiography, My Life Among the Giants. Barry, so at the end of the last segment, you were telling us about Mr. Fife from L.A., and you were packed on your way to the Twin Cities to work at KSTP. Mm-hmm. So how did that all work out with Mr. Fife? Did that resolve itself?
Well, no. Mr. Fife, when we left off, I had decided to call him and see if I could get the LA job still. And he said, well, Barry, he said, it's interesting you would call. He said, because today is my last day at KTLA, because I've been hired to be news director at KABC, Channel 7 in Los Angeles, the ABC flagship station. And we're already set with a weather guy, but keep in touch with me throughout the next couple of years or whatever. Well, my heart sank, except I was happy eventually, of course, that I finally got on the air in July 19th, 1971.
Okay.
Was the debut of our newscast with me doing the weather. And so anyway, then Mr. Hubbard, as I say, offered me a lifetime job 5 years later, 4 years later, and I didn't take it. I bid for the money in Washington, D.C., but they didn't want me to do what I did in the Twin Cities, and I said, why not? They said, well, this is 6 days after I got there. They said, we're consulted by the same consultants who consult WCCO TV. They just wanted you out of town because you were killing us in the ratings.
Interesting.
Yeah, well,
Competition.
it was like a knife in my heart. Willard Scott and I became really close friends. We still exchange Christmas cards.
Well, there's a great picture in your book, which is full of great pictures, Barry ZeVan, My Life Among the Giants, of you and Willard in a swimming pool. And it looks like Willard's pulling on a can of Budweiser.
Yeah, it was in his swimming pool at his farm in Upperville, Virginia. Yeah, and it actually is labeled, "Here's to good weather," you know. And our two bald heads together would make a great nightlight, you know. But anyway, so I'll finish the Fife story.
Yeah.
When I was on the air in D.C., I used to go up to New York frequently, and so Bill said, come on and see me at ABC. He became vice president of news for ABC, and he told me, he said, if you had gone with me at KTLA, you would have been Good Morning America's first weatherman.
Wow.
So.
It's not an easy life.
No. And part of it's of my own choosing. You know, wanting to see what was next, except for the Hubbard situation where they offered me a lifetime job. And when you're in your 30s, you don't realize the security factor for that.
Right.
To know that there's going to be a paycheck forever.
Right.
And so forth. My God, how stupid. And you kick yourself forever. And everybody said, well, you know, you've got to go on. And there are times, I mean, the move to Washington, D.C. was in many ways a really great one. It enabled me to develop friendships with some of the rest of the giants in this world, a lot of them in the political arena. I worked for the Shah of Iran twice for 2 years, producing films for them to get tourists over there to Iran and skiing. To know that all these world leaders were your fans. I was walking down the halls of the Senate office building one day, and I had to go to the bathroom, and the nearest office there was Senator Edmund Muskie. And so I go in, and I come back out, and Senator Muskie came out the door, and he just nodded, but then he yelled at me down the hall, I enjoy you, you know. And I said, oh, well, thank you, sir. I enjoy you, too. I didn't know what to say.
You had a relationship with John Ehrlichman, one of Nixon's White House plumbers. Tell us real quickly.
Well, I'll try to make it quick. John, before he went to prison, he was in our studio, and he said, Barry, he said, I'd like to keep in touch with you while I'm in prison, and then afterward, he said, I really like you, I enjoy you. He was only in for 18 months. And so he moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and then he said, if you're ever out here, why, whatever, we'll get together. Well, I happened to need to be in Albuquerque for something about a month later. I said, John, I'm going to be in, Albuquerque. He said, well, I'll drive up to Santa Fe and we'll have breakfast. So he took me to a restaurant called the Pink Adobe, and he had a book with him, which he didn't show me. He showed me the back of the book, but not the front. And then after breakfast, I said, what's that book? He flipped it over. It was Richard Nixon's memoirs. And he said, Nixon sent this to me while I was in prison, but I want you to see how he signed it. He opens the frontispiece, and it's stamped, Richard M. Nixon. Yeah. No, thank you, John.
Thanks for the
True
help.
job. Yeah. He said, that's what I went to prison for. He said, nobody should ever get Potomac fever.
Wow.
Stamped, Richard M. Nixon.
Barry ZeVan, we could do several part mini-series on your life. I so appreciate you sharing these stories.
Thank you.
With me. I want to encourage anybody out there to get Barry ZeVan, My Life Among the Giants. Can they order? Do you have a website we can order from?
Website or Amazon, just Amazon.com.
Okay.
Yeah, type in my name.
Barry ZeVan, Z-E-V-A-N.
Capital V-A-N. Yeah.
Capital V-A-N. You're back with the Wall of Power Radio Hour. This is your host, Paul Metsa. My guest, Barry ZeVan. His book that just came out February 2016 called My Life Among the Giants is a fascinating read.
Thank you.
Of Barry's 6, 7, how many decades you've been in
7
showbiz?
decades.
7 decades.
Yeah.
And you're coming on your 80th birthday?
80th birthday will be August 5th.
Wow.
Yeah.
What keeps you going?
The need to work.
Okay.
Economics.
Right.
Economics, yeah.
I think somebody asked a writer like Kurt Vonnegut or something, no, it was Norman Mailer. They asked Norman Mailer, what keeps you writing? And he goes, the mortgage.
Yeah, well, there you go. Mr. Mailer, I echo your great thought. On a sidebar of that, regarding questions of famous people, one person once asked Mel Brooks, what's the hardest thing about making film? And he said, putting in the little holes.
Now, there's a great, in the beginning of your book, Barry, you have a lot of your favorite experiences that people will read about in your music, but also some of the great platitudes that you've held dear over your life. The Golden Rule, taught to you by your mother?
Absolutely. I mean, to me, that says it all, the Golden Rule. Treat people the way you want to be treated. And I think it would solve wars. I think it would solve everything. Mm-hmm. And that's obviously naive, but we're capable of it, in my opinion. Today, except for my own children, grandchildren, and 8 great-grandchildren, they have been taught very, very well by my daughters. That sort of behavior. And I'm very proud of them because they do have some values. And by the same token, you drive down the street these days, it's like the Indy 500. Mm-hmm. Everybody's going to push you out of the way, and they're not doing a very nice thing with their fingers, and it's
right.
It's a shame, and I don't think the world has to be that way. And it's pretty naive too, probably. But even with the recent elections here, I have friends in Europe who are absolutely terrified. What have you become? What has the world become? Et cetera, et cetera. I'm thrilled with the recent French election. There are more people who want sanity than who don't want sanity.
Right.
And Lord willing, we'll get back to that.
Well, you've also survived 7 decades in a pretty cutthroat business. Mm-hmm. Tell us about some of your lowest times.
Well, one low time, I think it's in the book, I was working as a disc jockey in Wenatchee, Washington, and I went for 6 weeks once just eating a hamburger every other day and water. And that was it, because I got divorced and I wanted to keep my child support payments up. So to make the child support payments, there's no wing or halo here, but it's true. That's all I could afford. And that was for 6 weeks, and finally I got a little break with income, and could go back to eating 3 squares a day.
Well, now you did in the early 70s. How long were you on KSTP when your first time in the Twin Cities?
Okay, I started there. I actually started there before we went on the air. So as far as doing the weather, started in November of '70, and I left in November of '74. So.
What? And you came back then in the 80s.
Yeah, I worked in Detroit, and on weekends, the satellite news channels flew me back to Stamford, Connecticut, to work on weekends. It was ABC's answer to CNN. So I did the weather every 20 minutes, and some weather guy who was there was named Paul Douglas. And so Paul said he had gotten a call from Channel 11 here. He said, should I go back to the Twin Cities? And I said, you'll be #1. And of course, Paul did become #1. So anyway, he and Tom Ryther, my former wonderful sportscaster friend who I worked with at KSTP, recommended, in fact Ryther did, and then Douglas echoed his thoughts. He said Barry should be brought back to the Twin Cities, and that's how I got back to Channel 11. And that was in '83, I think.
Well, tell us a little bit about, you have 2 or 3 projects, documentaries you've written.
Well, written, produced, directed, and have production designed. And this particular one that you're holding up is called American Indian Homelands, Matters of Truth, Honor, and Dignity Immemorial. And it got a Telly Award as Best Documentary of 2006, and then 3 Emmy nominations for it. My dear friend from DC days, Sam Donaldson, was my host for that. And Sam has actually hosted 3 additional documentaries for me since then. And but that was the most powerful. And among my checkered career, I got to be the head of public relations for Grand Casinos for the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. And that was from 1991 till 1999.
Wow.
Yeah. And
When they were just getting off the ground.
well, in '91, I was there from the very beginning. Yeah. And yeah, it was, I've always had a huge affinity for the Indians. And by the way, they don't mind being called American Indians. People say Native Americans, and Russell Means told me once, he said, don't you ever call me a Native American. He said, that's a U.S. government appellation to be politically correct. He said, when Columbus landed, he kept a journal, and it said he was greeted by Los Indios, those of God. And he said, if we're of God, that's good enough for us. So here in this country, American Indians, and the biggest proof that American Indian is the way they want to be known is the great museum which opened actually the year we filmed this in 2006, the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, not the Native American. So that's in D.C., and that museum is one of the greatest in this world.
I would love to go see it. We just had Winona LaDuke on
Yeah, you
last week
Yeah.
with a great documentary that Kerry Pickett, a Northeast Minneapolis native, produced, directed, called First Daughter in the Black Snake. You also are a cancer survivor.
Yeah, I got lucky thanks to a wonderful oncologist who now is head of oncology out in Shakopee at the St. Francis Regional Medical Center. I get all my meds and all my operations and stuff at the VA, thanks to the Korean War. But anyway, her name was Dr. Asa Dinser Malcolm. She kept badgering me for 2 years. My white count kept going up and up and up and up. And she said, guess what? In essence, I'm paraphrasing here, if you don't have chemo and get rid of this, you're not going to be around. And she didn't threaten, and that's certainly not lawsuit material here. But anyway, she said, you've got to do this. My white count was way, way up. The normal
What year was that, Barry?
This is last year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
2016, thank you. So anyway, actually part of 2015, part of 2016, but anyway, I'm in remission now, thanks to her. But my white count, when we had started the chemo, was 264. Normal is 6.
Wow.
So after the first treatment, it was down to 120.
Wow.
And she said it's working, but it's working because she knew what she was doing.
So you're still out there on the street. Tell us about writing the book. What did that bring? I mean, it's so well crafted and there's so many memories there. How did you remember it all?
Thank you. I have what they call an eidetic memory. I can almost remember what I had for lunch on February something, 1953.
Right.
And I don't know why. But these flashes, it's almost, I guess some psychiatrist or psychologist or whatever could delve into how the mind works. But you can actually say a word or name a song or something. It immediately brings me back to a particular time, and I remember everything from that time.
And this is a great way to end this wonderful conversation with my new friend, Barry ZeVan. Barry, you've lived an amazing life. Best of luck with the book and any of your other projects. It's really a pleasure to know you.
Well, the same to you, sir.
Thanks, Barry. Have a good day. Thanks for watching The Wall of Power. I'm your host, Paul Metsa. See you next week.